Hi there, I'm Shannon Vavra and I'm a reporter for CyberScoop. And joining me today for Cyber Talks is Eva Galperin, the Cybersecurity Director at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and Chris Cox, the Executive Director at Operation Safe Escape. Today, we're here to talk about Stalkerware. It's a pernicious kind of surveillance software that infects often people who are targets of domestic abuse and surveillance on digital devices that have some of our most sensitive communications, everything from our texts, phone calls, to information about our geolocation and our browser history. And as bad as stalkerware apps are and as pernicious as they still persist. And I wanted to bring together Eva and Chris today, who are on the front lines dealing with stalkerware, to tell us the latest. Eva, I wonder if you could start us off and tell us a little bit about the anti-stalkerware coalition that you and Chris and several other organizations established last year. Why do we need this coalition against stalkerware, and what has been accomplished so far?
All right, so the Coalition Against Stalkerware was founded more than a year ago. We started with 10 sort of founding members who were academics and people at NGOs and people working with people on the ground, directly with survivors of domestic abuse, and also security companies and AV companies. And the reason why we decided to all work together was that it turned out that AV companies were not very good at detecting stalkerware, in spite of the fact that antivirus is essentially made for find that program you don't want on your device, identify it and get rid of it. So it turned out that there had been sort of a lack of political will to expand that definition out to include stalkerware, and that was something that we've made a lot of progress on in the last year or so. We've also expanded the coalition. The coalition now includes more than 20 organizations, and it includes organizations worldwide. So we're not just looking at stalkerware in North America or in the United States, or even in sort of like the global rich countries. We're really looking at fixing this problem worldwide.
Now, tell us a little bit about how you and the organization approach managing detections and how disparate the data is that all of these antivirus companies can pull together on different stalkerware use around the world. What are the gaps that remain in making sure that people are as protected as they can be against this kind of surveillance?
Well, one of the biggest problems is that often the AV companies simply don't share information about stalkerware. And so one company may detect certain types of stalkerware and another company's product may detect other products, and there's no kind of talking between them in order to sort of have the rising tide lift all boats. And that's one of the things that the Coalition Against Stalkerware has gone a long way towards mitigating. And now we have companies who share data with each other, so that every time one company manages to identify the latest in stalkerware, everyone gets to benefit.
And I wonder if you may not have data right in front of you, but could you tell us a little bit about any results or progress that you've seen in the last year? Are people less targeted by stalkerware since the coalition was founded? Are detections up? Are companies getting better at detecting? What are the lessons learned so far in this journey?
Oh, I have to do that horrible thing where I start with it's complicated. We're not sure. Because there wasn't a lot of research to begin with, and because detection was so poor to begin with. When I started doing my work on stalkerware in 2017 and 2018, one of the big problems was that detection rates were very low. Detection rates have definitely gone up. Detection rates have gone up considerably by the companies who are involved in the Coalition Against Stalkerware, and they regularly issue reports. That's extremely useful. But we can't tell if detection rates are up because they're looking for more of them, or because they're more interested in finding stalkerware, or because stalkerware is being used more commonly across the world. Probably some sort of combination of both. It's not an either or situation.
Got it. And I'd love to sort of bring the focus of our conversation to something else that's happened in the last year, obviously, the pandemic and the coronavirus. And Chris, Operation Safe Escape was founded to sort of help victims of domestic violence and survivors escape safe situations without leaving digital traces behind. How has your interaction with survivors dealing with stalkerware changed in the last year, now that many people are often sheltering with those who may be monitoring their digital devices?
Well, absolutely. One thing that's become much more of a challenge is that now that people are kind of sheltering in place and workplaces have been closing and hours have been cut, is not only increasing the amount of contact between the individual and the offender, but you're also increasing the stress level. You're increasing the risk involved in the circumstances, because tempers are high. People are locked in together. They're stressed about money, stressed about work. And so, of course, instances of abuse, unfortunately, are really increasing. And so you also have circumstances where the person may have been at work, and that may have given the person some time to research or reach out or build their support system, and now they're losing that. It's very, very, very unfortunate. So we are seeing more cases of different forms of technical abuse. We're seeing forms of shoulder surfing to get the passwords, and yes, including stalkerware. So it's another tool that, now that more information is becoming available, that number one, the abusers are making more use of. But at the same time, people are becoming a little bit more aware of the risks inherent in it. So there's almost an arms race, a knowledge race, if you will, between the bad guys using those tools, but also the good guys, the actual people that are being victimized by these tools, are becoming increasingly aware of what to look for. And a lot of that's due to the outreach of the coalition and other important groups.
Now, tell us a little bit about how things have changed during the pandemic in terms of the advice that you might give to people who are dealing with what they suspect to be stalkerware on their phones or similar sort of surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
Have your recommendations changed? Are people's questions different now? Give us some insight into the day-to-day.
One thing that Operation Safe Escape does is we kind of straddle the line between the technology and the advocacy. So we try to be aware of both facets of it. And one thing that is often the technology answer, one thing that's often the security answer, is that when you find some malicious software on your device or malicious programs, you remove it as quickly as you can so that you can get your device back to pure working order. But of course, one thing that Operation Safe Escape and the coalition has been advocating is that that's not always the right answer from a security perspective. So or from a safety perspective, really. So if the person removes—
And could you explain why that is? What is it about stalkerware that makes it so difficult to either remove or why it makes it unsafe to tamper with?
Sure. So it's often very easy to remove technically, but at the same time, it's being monitored. So the person that installed it, the person that's doing the monitoring, they know when the device, when they suddenly lose the feed, when they lose the connection. And so that may give the person an indication that they've been found out, or that there may be a change coming up, and that can increase the risk, because they're going to, if they feel they're losing control of the situation, they can react in an unpredictable way.
Those are often the circumstances under which you see the abuser escalate violence.
Right.
And that's something that I find so important about the work that you all are doing with the Coalition Against Stalkerware, is it's not just security expertise coming together. You also are working, across the board with domestic violence organizations and sort of pooling all of your knowledge and talent and experience and background working with survivors. And sort of on a broader scale, when we're talking about the pandemic and the ways that technology have changed in the last several months, Eva, I know that you have some concerns you wanted to share with us today about bossware and proctoring during exams and the ways that children are now interacting with technology. Could you tell us a little bit about what that looks like from the stalkerware perspective and the work you're doing there?
Sure. So one of the things that we did when we're sort of framing the discussion around stalkerware was we really had to reframe it in order to target the people who had previously thought that spying on your partner is somehow okay and is somehow not abusive. And one of the things that we're really seeing a lot of during quarantine time is that people are working increasingly from home, And students are increasingly also expected to do all of their learning at a distance. And often this is facilitated by software that resembles Stalkerware a great deal. And one of the things that we point out about Stalkerware is that Stalkerware kind of circumvents consent. The whole idea is that Stalkerware is supposed to hide on your device so that you don't know it's there. Proctoring software and bossware does not necessarily do that. In fact, often it doesn't. But you are also in a position where you don't really have a choice. For example, the law students who are about to take the California State Bar exam have a choice of download ExamSoft or don't take the bar exam and don't end up at the bar. And people who have various bossware programs installed on their computers that may or may not watch them on their personal machines after work during a time when their boss has no reason to surveil them. Their other option is quit. And often that sort of choice isn't really a choice.
And if I may, building on that, because you're touching on the similarity and really the co-use types of things. And often at the same time, the same software, the same developers, even the same people that are developing stalkerware apps to be used against, marketed towards spouses and other non-consenting adults, they're the same individuals building those same tools for oppressive regimes all over the world. There's been several cases, Eva, that you're familiar with as well, in which they're actually developing, using that same bit of code and taking money from both sides in order to fund the oppression of dissidents and journalists and other horrible things.
And Chris, you and I spoke earlier this year about a particular case that you had come across in your work that's a little bit sensitive, but it has to do with telework and stalkerware. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience and what companies and individuals can learn from that?
Of course. So in general terms, one thing we found that's interesting and kind of looking at it from the other angle is that a lot of companies are starting to allow people to use their own personal devices at home or bring your own devices and things like that. And of course, if you're going to connect to your corporate network, there has to be some sort of security policies in place. So companies are saying, you can use your own phone, you can use your own computer, but we need to make sure it's safe. We need to scan it, we need to connect it to it, whatever their policies may be. And we've seen, I'll say at least one case in which the individual allowed their company to perform a security audit of their device and install the VPN and all these other things. And that's where they found that there was stalkerware installed on this person's device. And so as an indirect result of the security policies of the company and the bring your own device policy that they had, which included security procedures, they were able to identify that device and that person was able to address it in the way that was safe.
Got it. Now, I want to bring us to some current events, which is Google has recently announced that they're working to ban advertisements that push different stalkerware-like applications that allow partner surveillance. And then in recent weeks, they've also announced that they are now working to ban stalkerware applications that don't obtain that kind of consent that you're talking about, Eva, from the Google Play Store. And I'm curious if you could both weigh in what good has been done by these new policy announcements and where might they also miss the mark in some ways?
I'll jump in because actually on the funny thing, I did notice that today Google amended, or their amendment of the developer policy went into place where they fixed a critical typo where it said that tracking devices cannot be used to track children, but it can be used to track adults such as spouses. They got the words mixed up a little bit there. And that caused a little bit of confusion, but they fixed that effective today. But it really goes to show you how the people that are developing these tools, they're going to stick to the letter of the law and they're going to do exactly what they can to try to get away with something. So to feed into that is that, of course, Google's policy is that they will not allow you to advertise for devices that are clearly used for stalking and for this type of application. But if you look even today, if you do a search for track my spouse or is my significant other cheating on me, you'll still see those in some of the top results in the listings. And it's often not overt, and sometimes I think it is, but there's kind of some subtle, not so subtle codes that they're using in order to kind of get away with saying, no, this is for children, employees, and tracking your own devices. It doesn't fool anybody, but they're trying to get away with it anyways.
Eva, what say you about the new Google policies?
Well, one thing to make clear is that Stalkerware, especially Stalkerware, which operates with the purpose of fooling the person that that is using the device into thinking that they're not being surveilled, was already in violation of the Google Store's policies. This is simply clarifying to make it, very obvious that this particular type of software is not okay, and we're not going to be distributing it. One of the ways in which the Google Play Store is different from the Apple walled garden is that you can download things from other stores. It's not just the store which is controlled by Google. And so while this does sort of shut down the main source of Stalkerware, what we see is that Stalkerware simply becomes downloadable from other stores or directly from the website. So this only slows them down a little bit.
But yeah, and anything that increases the level of difficulty is a good thing. You're right, it doesn't solve the problem as a whole, but taking it off the platforms does help. And it's a very good point about that it's already been in violation. I think the similar thing is that not only the advertising, not only the availability, but also really the payment processors. There's some payment processors where they won't sell certain adult services, but you can spy on certain adults without them knowing about it. There used to be really kind of a high level of difficulty to install Stalkerware tools. You had to know where to get it, you had to know how to install it, you had to figure out this whole cryptocurrency thing to pay for it. And we've just made it really, really easy because there's a profit motive.
And I think something you're both touching on is maybe there are policies that can be issued from different app stores, but it seems like those developers who are going to make a buck off of Stalkerware may just continue for the time being. But from sort of the legal perspective, I'm curious what you think can be done to hold developers and perpetrators accountable who use Stalkerware. Have we seen any strong showing that there's a legal case to be made against these nefarious actors?
There have been some legal cases against these actors, but I'm also really careful whenever anyone says there ought to be a law. For one thing, because a lot of laws already exist. These Stalkerware companies are frequently already breaking laws. By purchasing the Stalkerware and using it to harass someone or covertly surveil them, the user is almost certainly breaking a variety of laws. So the problem is not lack of legislation, it's lack of political will and lack of understanding on the part of law enforcement for how to gather this data and properly prosecute people who engage in this kind of behavior. And to some extent, it's even an understanding that this kind of behavior is somehow okay and that it's socially acceptable. And that's really one of the things that the Coalition Against Stalkerware has moved very hard to fight against. We want to change the way in which people talk about these apps and talk about spying on their spouses as somehow socially acceptable.
And now, Eva, you recently had an interesting conversation with a senior US government official at the FTC. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So one of the things that I do in my sort of typical talk on Stalkerware is I talk a little bit about what the FTC has done so far to crack down on Stalkerware companies. And the most recent action that the FTC has taken was an action against a company called RetinaX. And RetinaX not only made Stalkerware, but they didn't do a very good job. And so the FTC fined them and entered into a deal with them, largely because the company had a number of data breaches. And the message that I have gotten from inside of the FTC is that they would like to take more action against Stalkerware, and they would like to do it on the basis of they're making Stalkerware and not the fact that they're making Stalkerware poorly.
Thank you. An important conversation to be had. Now we're nearing the end of our time here, but I wanted to leave us on a note talking about advice, the look ahead, what can be done about stalkerware. And I'm curious if both of you could share some final thoughts with our audience today. What still needs to be done? And for those who are listening who may think that they are being targeted by stalkerware right now, or who are really interested in preventing that from happening to themselves personally, what messages can you leave them with today?
So I think on one hand, we really need to kind of hold ourselves and hold those around us accountable. If you look at any stalker, and many are being deplatformed, that's great, but any stalkerware type app on a Play Store or any of the stores available, there's actual reviews where people are talking about how well it allowed them to spy on their boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other. And that's the kind of thing that we really need to kind of hold each other against, and to say this is not okay behavior, this is not something that we can be doing. And at the same time, we all need to take steps to kind of normalize protecting ourselves. Sudden changes aren't always good. If you're making sudden changes after you have suspicion that you're being tracked, that may naturally alert someone who may be tracking your device. But so keeping your devices, your computers, your phones patched, updated, a good security suite, a good antivirus suite that's watching for those things is good, because then of course, should there be any changes, you'll be aware of it and you can take certain steps after that point. It's really important to kind of understand your own threat model and say, what's safe for me? If this is detected, am I safe to remove it? Do I have a safe place to go? And if there's any question, or if there's anything that anyone needs some assistance with, you can always reach out to Operation Safe Escape through safeescape.org, or also through the Coalition Against Stalkerware, which is stopstalkerware.org. I'd just like to note with that, it's really important to make sure you're doing that from a safe device, to go to a library, a trusted friend's house. And that way, if your devices are compromised, you can get some help without having that known.
Thank you. Eva, do you have any final words?
Sure. So there are plenty of things left to do. For example, I don't think we're ever going to be done with awareness raising. Just getting past that bit is very hard. But beyond awareness raising, definitely changing the ways in which AV companies view stalkerware, changing the ways in which the people who control the app platforms view stalkerware, changing the advertising, changing the way the FTC deals with it, and most importantly, changing the conversation that we have about stalkerware to a point where no one would ever leave a review saying, oh, this thing really allowed me to spy on my spouse really well, plus, plus.
We obviously have a lot of work left to do, and it goes without saying, thank you both for working so much on this issue. It means a lot to people who may not be interested in sharing publicly how much it matters. So thank you both for joining us today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of Cyber Talks. Thank you.
Thank you.